Today we talk about Naval War of 1812, a very self-explanatory title. It tells you all you need to know about the topic, no ambiguities. This is a two-player game by Worthington Games. A player will control a group of ships belonging to the British Navy, another player will control American ships, and the players are trying to sink merchant ships belonging to the opponent while at the same time trying to prevent their merchant ships and their own warships from being sunk by the enemy. Card-driven game, very simple rules, but a lot of interesting subtleties in the design. So let me show you how the game plays, and then I can tell a little bit about what I think of the design and the subtleties that the design can create. This is a card-driven game. Each player has a deck of 27 cards, blue for the American player, red for the British player. At the beginning of the game, you shuffle the cards and you remove 2 cards from your deck, so that you cannot count cards. You never know which cards are exactly in your deck. And then you deal 5 cards to each player. Each player will receive 5 cards each turn. The game is divided in 5 turns. At the end of turn 5, the game is over, you count victory points and you determine the winner. Each turn is divided in 5 rounds. During each round, each player will select one of their cards and will commit it secretly. At the same time, then you reveal the cards. Similar to what happens in games such as Julius Caesar by Columbia Games. You reveal the cards, you look at the numbers printed on top, and you look at the effects printed under those numbers. The numbers are the amount of movement points that each card grants to the owning player for that round, and the effects simply create special events on the board. These effects may be resolved in different parts of the turn. Some of those effects are resolved at the beginning of the turn, some during the turn, because there's a vast variety of effects that the cards can create. Some cards may give you extra victory points, some may give you extra movement, extra dice in attack. They may force the ships of the opponent not to move, or they may force the ships of the opponent to go back to port. A lot of different things may happen. And very often you have the dilemma because you have an excellent effect that doesn't go together with a very high amount of movement points on that card. But sometimes you want to play cards with lower movement values, actually. Why so? Well, when you compare the movement numbers, the player with the lowest number goes first in a turn, which, depending on the circumstances, sometimes is an advantage. Sometimes you want to move quick, place your ship close to that of the opponent, and strike fast, and some of the times that's not a great advantage. In any case, the player with the lowest amount goes first, and the other player goes next. If there is a tie, the American player goes first. During your turn, you resolve the effects of the cards whenever the effects apply. The player that goes first spends his movement points, then resolves attacks. Then the other player does the same movement, using movement points and attacks. But now let me show you the board so you see what you can do with those movement points. This is the board for the game. It has 4 areas in the corners that you use to keep track of victory points using these poker chips that come with the game. And then, of course, you have the area where the ships belonging to the opponents, to the 2 opponents, move and fight. The American player starts the game with 4 warships, blue ships. The British player only with 3, but the British player will receive an extra warship each turn, starting from turn 2. This represents the increasing momentum that the British Navy acquired as the War of 1812 progressed. Each player also controls merchant ships. The grey merchant ships belong to the British player, and the white merchant ships belong to the American player. During your turn, you will spend movement points on your ships. All merchant ships have 2 straight movement points. They can move up to 2 dots in front of them during their movement phase. And so do British warships. They also have up to 2 straight movement points. American warships are the fastest in the game. They can move up to 3 straight movement points. So, if I have a card that gives me 7 movement points, I can spend those movement points on any and all of my ships. I can split those points in any way I want, as long as no ship goes above its maximum movement allowance. So I could spend 3 movement points on this ship and move it 1, 2, 3, like that. I talked about straight movement points because turning is a slightly different thing. If you want to turn one of your ships by 90 degrees, suppose that that ship started its turn there. If you want to turn that ship by 90 degrees, you can spend a movement point to do that. 1 movement point, or 1 movement point. That movement point counts against the maximum allowance of movement points that you have for that turn, but does not count against the maximum allowance of straight movement points that an individual ship has. So if the ship was there at the beginning of the turn, I could spend 1 movement point from my total to turn it like that, and then 1, 2, 3, and then that ship can move no more because it reached its maximum allowance of straight movement points. I hope that the difference between turning points and straight movement points is clear. It is really not hard once you start playing the game. That ship so spent 4 movement points. Suppose that then I want to spend 1 and 2 on this one and 1 on that one. 7. That's it. That's the end of the turn. Okay, but what are these ships trying to do? Merchant ships are trying to survive against the attacks of the warships, and the warships are trying to sink everything that is on the surface. As they try to survive, merchant ships are also trying to exit the board, possibly. Each player has 4 color dots, 4 red dots for the British player. Those are also the dots that are used for deployment, and 4 light blue for the American player. I don't know if you can see that well. Those dots are also used to exit the board. If a merchant ship is on one of those dots and is facing the outside of the board, then the merchant ship can spend a movement point to exit the board, and that gives a victory point to the player that managed to exit the ship. The merchant ship will come back on the board at the beginning of the next round anywhere in the half of the board belonging to the opponent. So American merchant ships come back on this side, and British ships on this side, British merchant ships. If you end your turn with your ships adjacent to enemy ships, and specifically with the broadside of your ship adjacent to enemy ships, then you can attack that ship. In that case, for example, this British ship could attack that American ship. This American warship could attack both of these ships here, but and this British ship could attack that one, but that one couldn't attack that one because the guns are facing the broadsides. You can attack after you resolve your movement, and you can attack with any and all of your ships that are adjacent to enemy warships with their broadsides, but attacking is always voluntary, never mandatory. When you're attacking, you simply roll a certain amount of dice. American warships roll 2 dice, so they're fast, but they don't hit very hard. And British warships roll 3 dice. That's bad. British merchant ships and American merchant ships only roll a single die. Also, they can only roll that die in defense. They cannot trigger an attack unless there is a specific game effect that allows them to do so. Suppose that ship is attacking that one, then you simply roll all the dice that apply, and you look at the single individual result. And you look at the single highest result. In this case, 5 and 1. The British player has the single highest result, inflicts a hit on the opponent. Merchant ships only take a hit to sink, so this ship just sunk, and that gives 2 victory points to the opponent. Sinking a merchant ship of the opponent gives you 2 victory points. The ship will come back next round in the half of the board belonging to the opponent. If you are attacking an opponent and the opponent is crossing your T, that is, you are facing the opponent with your broadside, which is great, because so you can attack, and the opponent is not showing a broadside, then you will get a +1 on your highest result. Suppose that that British ship now is attacking that American ship. That ship rolls 2 dice in defense, but the British will have a +1 on their highest result. The highest results in this case are these ones, but the British have a +1, so the American ship takes a hit. And warships can receive up to 2 hits. It is the second hit that destroys them, so you represent the first hit by placing one of those poker chips under the ship that just took a hit. And warships that are destroyed will re-enter the game at the beginning of the next turn, not of the next round, and they will re-enter the game from one of your 4 colored entry points. And when you sink a warship belonging to the opponent, that is a lot of points. That is 3 victory points. Pretty good, really. Also, another important thing is that when a warship is attacking a merchant, the merchant is rolling a die to defend. And well, if there's a tie, nothing happens. In any sort of combat, when there's a tie, nothing happens, no winners, no losers. But suppose that you have a case in which the defending merchant wins the fight. In this case, you would have 6 versus 5. The British merchant ship wins the battle. Well, the warship doesn't take any hits. That means that unless there are game effects that override that, merchant ships never inflict hits on warships. When they win a battle, they simply have defended effectively. And this is pretty much how the game works, really. You keep playing cards, resolving effects, moving your ships, moving things around, attacking the opponent, and simply you continue like this until the 25th card has been resolved at the end of turn 5. At that point, the player with the highest amount of victory points is the winner. I have to tell you, when I looked at the board for the first time, it looked a little dry, a little abstract. I didn't know what to think about the game. My expectations weren't extremely high, but I was pleasantly surprised. It turns out that this is a game that exceeded my expectations. This is a game that I definitely enjoyed playing. Now, there's a certain abstract quality. It is there. The scale of the game, for example, is unclear to me. You had the impression that there is a large scale, you're looking at large distances on the board, and then yet, as the ships approach one another, it seems like things zoom in, and then the orientation of your ship is relevant. I had the impression that you can turn once when you're miles and miles ahead from your opponent, then you go in a straight line and you cannot adjust, even in the slightest, to be able to gain a good position. Is that how it worked back in the day? I don't really know enough about naval wars of the time. It just seems strange to me that these ships are somewhat stiff. But if you're not interested in 100% of realism, if you don't see this as a simulation, I don't think you should see this as a simulation to start with, then it turns out that this game, which is maybe a semi-abstract game with a war theme, is fun. This is a fun and engaging game, which to me is what matters the most. The cards present you with all sorts of dilemmas, all sorts of tough decisions. Some effects are very good, but the amount of movement points related to those effects are not good for you in that specific turn, in that situation. Sometimes you have a card that you really want to use to move a lot, but you will know that the opponent may be able to move first by playing a lower value card and maybe hit first. It may also be that that card that allows you to move a lot has an effect which is great. You don't want to waste that card, but if you play at that specific moment, maybe you will waste it. Suppose it is an attack effect, and if you play it in a certain moment, you will waste it because you're not going to be able to attack that turn. Things like that. So you had to balance there between movement and effects. Very, very fun decisions. I noticed that the effects of the two decks are slightly different, and this is something that I found impressive. The two sides do play in different ways. There is a splash of historical feel there, and if that is not enough for you to create a real authentic feel, in any case you have a non-symmetrical simulation, that situation that will increase your play value, because of course you can switch sides for a different experience. The Americans can outrun anything and everything on the board with their warships. However, those warships are not as heavily armed as the British warships. Even worse than that is the fact that later the British warships will heavily outnumber the Americans. So what happens is that the American warships need to run around quickly, hunt for enemy merchant ships, sink as many as possible in the early phases of the game. This is also facilitated by the fact that there are more British merchant ships on the board than there are American merchant ships, so the hunting ground is good for the American warships. But the Americans really have to inflict a lot of damage on the opponent to gain a lot of points in the early phases of the game, because later the wave of incoming British warships that will be spreading all around the board, that will be considerable. It will be incredibly hard for the American player to outmaneuver everybody, and sooner or later you start getting close to those very tough and very heavily armed British warships, and it is bad. That's going to leave a dent, let's put it that way, in your American Navy. The game is very simple. This definitely is an entry level game, not just something you can play with non-war gamers. You could even play with non-gamers at all. This is a game that can be picked up and learned very easily, and then it reveals its subtleties as you play and play again. Really learning how to maneuver your ships effectively and use your resources. There are a lot of things there to be learned, to be experienced, to be enjoyed. And all of these decisions, all of those nuances and subtleties really made the game exciting to me. I know that the board looks really much like that of an older board game, Broadside. I haven't played that game though, so I don't know if it's just a cosmetic resemblance or there are also similarities in the design. I don't know that, but what I know is that Naval War of 1812 is an upside down game, and when it is not upside down, it is really fun. Really fun, really enjoyable, anybody could play, and there is a lot in this design to be enjoyed and discovered. To me, this is a game that exceeds expectation, a game that I enjoyed a lot, and I recommend it wholeheartedly.